Hi, this is Dr. Richard Ruling, sharing with you on Mark Finley's response to David Gates' video. I was asked to give this response. I actually know both of them fairly well. I spent a year with Mark Finley at Wildwood more than 40 years ago. We did a 5-day program to help people stop smoking together, and I've been in touch with him on a number of occasions since then. Recently, just a year or two ago, talked with him at a conference briefly. I'm concerned about his understanding of church, our definition of what church is, and his concern for the prophetic interpretation by David Gates. And the point is that the church is seen last time in Scripture in Revelation 3, and it's not a very flattering perspective. The words from the True Witness include wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked. And I'd just like to focus on one of those, the word blind. It's been said that in the land of the blind, a man with one eye is king. Okay, but in this case, it's even worse than that, because the message to the Laodiceans is really addressed to the messenger. Agolos is the Greek word for messenger. And so the messenger to the church, or the leader of the church who's speaking, is blind, does not see what's coming. Okay. And the word for Laodicea in Greek, laos, means people, and decea, decree, judgment. People in a time of judgment, basically, is what it means. And that we overlook the fact that historically that ancient church ended in an earthquake. Serious knock. That's I shared this, my understanding, with Richard Davidson of Andrews University. He said, well, the Hebrew word for knock includes a severe meaning. Dafak is the Hebrew word. But the point is that I believe we're coming to very serious times, and we need to get it right. And I'm concerned, like Mark Finley and David Gates. We're all concerned. Let's see both sides of it, maybe. And so I'd like to share with you a perspective of Mark Finley's use of history, of Ellen White, and Scripture, in order to support what I believe is a truer picture. I don't agree with everything David Gates said, but I love his spirit. Not many people would do what he has done in moving to a jungle, cutting off any support from the U.S., and just see if God will provide. He did medical missionary work. God did provide. And now David Gates' ministry has expanded to airplanes in several continents, doing missionary work and so on. God has blessed him in his ministry, and I think we need to take a close look and not be quick to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So let's consider this. I'd like to suggest a website that could be very helpful. It's Ellen White's egwritings.org. And I will be giving references here that you can support. Even if you don't have the books, you can go to egwritings.org and type in the reference that I'm going to give you. You can write it down if you like, and then find it. If you really know how to use the website, you can copy a quote and then paste it into your email and send it, as I do sometimes also. So I'd like to share with you some thoughts as... And forgive me for looking at some notes, but I just got back last night from Phoenix when someone was asking me, did you see Mark Finley's video, etc. He shares what most SDAs understand or believe about end times. And my point is, though, that if the messenger is blind, there could be some things we're not seeing, okay? And at point 7:20 in his video. Now I'm talking about the video that's 39 minutes and 51 seconds that Mark Finley posted, not the longer edition of over an hour. Okay, and he mentions the two ways to interpret preterism as prophecy. One is preterism. Now these two ideas were hatched up by the Jesuits to take the heat off the papacy, because it's pretty plain if you just read the Bible without their interpretation that it might be the papacy if you're thinking about that at all. And but preterism interprets the little horn of Daniel 7 as Antiochus Epiphanes. Well, Seventh Day Adventists don't believe that. And when Christ said, beware or watch the abomination that Daniel's talking about, he wasn't warning about something future that was back to Antiochus Epiphanes. So it was really future from Christ's time, and the papacy, the church, did grow up and fulfill time prophecies, as Mark Finley has said. He's correct about history, but Mark Finley is denigrating David Gates for not accepting the historical application and applying it all future. Well, it can also be future, though there are multiple applications. So just to say that David Gates doesn't see the historic, yeah, I think he does. I do too. 538 to 1798 was the 1260 days of papal supremacy, ended by Napoleon's general Berthier and so on. But that does not mean there won't be an end time, and Mark Finley even twists it and does not see what Ellen White says, the prophecies of Revelation in their order. Okay, in their order means as they come. But at the 8-minute and 30-second point, or 42nd, Mark Finley is saying that the 42 months of the beast came before the deadly wound healed. Well, historically, that's right. But in the end time, it's going to come after the deadly wound heals. The deadly wound is healing. Martin Luther last year was kicked in the gutter when the Lutherans decided to have joint communion with the papacy. Reformation, Protestantism over from many perspectives. And we will see the beast have power again in the New World Order that's coming. That's the image of the beast. Okay? The image of Old World Order will be New World Order. You can even see it on your dollar bill. Novus Ordo Seclorum. Okay? People that handle the money, they understand we're moving that direction. And money will be an issue as well. But my point is that reapplication of prophecy, Ecclesiastes 3:15, God says, and this is in the New English Bible, what is has been already, what is to come has been already. God summons each event back in its turn, and it's coming. Okay? And David Gates sees it, and I do believe his timing is correct too. I just don't believe we're going to have a Sunday law next spring. I believe that it's kind of like Cestius. Cestius came, the Roman general, to Jerusalem in 66 AD and planted the banner of his that included the sun gods. Okay, but the Jews coming out of the city knocked that banner down, I'm sure, as they beat the Romans into retreat. Okay, and my point is that there will be a period of time, civil war maybe, bad times in America, when God gives his side, and this is Revelation 11, verse 3, I will give power to my two witnesses for 1,260 days. It says in verse 6, they have power to shut the heavens and turn water to blood. Well, this didn't happen back in the 1,260 years of papal supremacy, but it will happen in the end when God gives his two witnesses. It sounds like Moses and Elijah power, okay? Moses turned water to blood, Elijah shut the heavens, and I believe those will represent the trumpet plagues of Revelation 8, as you see the water to turn to blood in Revelation 8:8. Maybe the heavens are dried up in verse 7 when all the green grass burns up, etc. So, and we may bring that. We may be given the power to do that if we're ready for the end time events to come when they open. Okay, and the issue is that it's not no more time prophecies, nothing based on time, etc. Those are early statements by Ellen White in early writings, page 75, and it was in 1851. And the point is that she later in life, 40-some years later, said, we have many lessons to learn and many, many to unlearn, okay? And then she says, and this is Counsels to Writers and Editors, sorry, I'm not finding the quote to hand up in front of you, but it's CW, Counsels to Writers and Editors, page 37, I'm sorry, verse 27, that all three messages are still to be given. We're to show the order and the application of the prophecies that bring us to the third. Well, the application of the prophecies that bring us to the third are when first and second messages fit, okay? And they did not fit in 1844. Not as they expected. The world didn't burn. They weren't raptured. They gave the message, the bridegroom comes. But Adventism is a prophetic movement endorsed by Christ in Revelation 10. He's the angel that stands 1 foot on the land, 1 foot on the sea. That's ownership. He owns it. And he told John to eat this little book, and it was the book of Daniel because of similar imagery in Revelation 10th chapter and Daniel 12th chapter. Similar imagery. And bitter belly for John, and bitter belly or bitter disappointment for pioneers who thought Christ was going to come in 1844. But prophesy again means understand those messages and give them when it's appropriate, because they will fit. Christ isn't giving us a bum deal, okay? And we are approaching a time when time of judgment is impending on this world. The Greek word for judgment is crisis, spelled with a K, K-R-I-S-I-S. Probably pronounced crisis or something like that. But crisis is impending, and what we do in a crisis determines our destiny. And we've got to get it right. Historically, the pioneers gave it with the message, the bridegroom comes. But they thought rapture, and not again. It won't be the rapture this time either. When God came to Egypt, he did judgment, just like we're talking about, first angel, and he took Israel to a covenant and said, I'm married to you. This is how the wedding parables fit. It's not about going to heaven suddenly and eating cake, okay? It's understanding how history will repeat. If we're going to sing the song of Moses and the Lamb, and nobody else can learn it, it's because nobody else has our experience. But it's going to be like Moses. It won't be exactly like Moses, but history rhymes. It will rhyme, okay? And America is like Egypt. They killed babies, if you recall. We've aborted 60 million babies. Egypt enslaved people in alcohol, tobacco, drugs, food, fashion, fiction, gambling, greed, sex, perversion, pornography, violence. We're in bondage and we celebrate freedom. We think we're free, but this is crazy. And God is going to take those who really are free and understand to a wedding commitment, a covenant. And that's Ellen White's last definition of the church. In Prophets and Kings 7:13 and 14, she says what God purposed to do for the world through Israel, the chosen nation, he will finally accomplish through his church on earth today, even his covenant-keeping people. And that's her definition. We think, oh, we're covenant-keeping. Well, not really. We haven't made the covenant yet. God made the covenant when they came out of Egypt. And there's going to be an event like Egypt, big, huge, in which we will need to make a covenant and marry the bridegroom. Okay, that will be our opportunity. And when we do, we can keep the covenant, which is more than we've understanding. Ellen White says, to this covenant-keeping people will be fulfilled all the covenant promises made by Jehovah to that ancient people. Okay, so that's huge. I want to be a part of that, and I believe you can be too, if we just understand it and get it right from the wedding parables. The wedding parables have information that we haven't looked at carefully. We just kind of glossed over it. We think, well, be ready, be ready, be ready. And then some pastors say, well, all you need is a relationship with Jesus. Just, well, how do we relate to him, and how do we be saved if we don't do what he said? We need to look at it and get it straight. All the wedding parables imply a sudden event beyond which there's no time to get ready. And if we aren't ready at that time, it won't happen, okay? For us, I'm just saying. It will happen for whoever is ready. But the wedding parable of Luke 12 is especially insightful. We're supposed to be ready when he comes from the wedding, that when he knocks, we open immediately. Immediately doesn't allow for, well, let's have a church meeting and talk about it, think about it, what is that going to be a response? Immediately is just like, the Bible text is that when Christ called James and John, they immediately left the ship and their father to follow him. It will be an opportunity for us, like James and John, okay, to leave our ship, what's really, our livelihood maybe, our close family relationships, as they left their father, and they were following Christ. But I believe if we follow him in the end times, it's for us, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. That's the song of the Lamb. We sing the song of Moses and the Lamb, 144,000. The Lamb is he's going to follow, yea, though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, because Christ is with me. And we will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That's also in Psalm 23. High privilege for the 144,000. And in Luke 12, those who are ready are made ruler over all that he has. Since my name is ruling, I really wanted to understand that, and I believe I do, but it's not just about me. It's about 144,000 who will be ready at the right time. And the evidence supports David Gates' impression that next spring will be huge. Okay, I can give this to you several ways, but specifically, David Gates is citing the Pope's visit to Congress on the Day of Atonement. And my point is that that is the abomination standing where it ought not. That's the wording, by the way, of Mark 13, verse 14. When you see the abomination standing where it ought not. And Pope ought not to be in Congress. He believes in church and state. And even his Laudato Si encyclical at that time that he came is about Sunday and the Eucharist, blessings and so on. Close down work so that no greenhouse gases with businesses running and so on. Less greenhouse gases. Well, if the Pope knows so much about the economy, why doesn't he help South America? Because all of those poor people want to come to this country. Okay, Pope has no business telling us how to run our business or to enforce Sunday like they do in South America. So I just say let's take another look. It is 3.5 years this coming spring to when the Pope stood in Congress. And by the way, the abomination standing where it ought not also applies to the Supreme Court. Gay marriage, redefinition of marriage, had standing in the Supreme Court, and it ought not to be there at all. Okay, that's what will spew us out of the land, according to Leviticus 18, verse 25. And so it's a big trouble, and yet even our churches, in some cases, allowing practicing homosexuals to be ordained as elders and installed as elders in churches, at least in California. I have a colleague, classmate who protested this and was told not to come back to church. Okay, so hello, we got problems. But my point is, rather than try to fight this and make everybody do it our way, Ellen White says in Great Controversy, page 292, third paragraph down, to define and punish heresy is the most deeply rooted of papal errors. So we cannot make people do it our way. I understand that the corporation wants to do it that way. They've incorporated the name and don't want anybody else to use it but them. And when a friend of mine, whom I happen to know, and he wasn't a homosexual, but he had a church, Creation Seventh-day Adventist, they put him in prison. This is the beast system, okay, that will do this. And it has to go. It goes back really to some bad changes we made a century more than a century ago. In 1901, Ellen White came back from Australia, where she brethren sent her to get rid of her for her agitation for the 1888 message. She came back and appealed for reorganization. They voted it. She was so happy. She praised it. The Adventist Review a couple years ago printed what she said because they wanted the church to have confidence in their organization. But they did not print the 2 years later when they did not institute those changes that she suggested of decentralization, and they voted a more hierarchical system that is, and P.T. McGann, who was president of Loma Linda, said, if you vote what you're about to do, you're voting into existence what happened centuries ago when the papacy was born, a hierarchical structure. And we have the same number of layers as the Catholic Church does. We have, let me just say, they have priests, bishops, archbishops, cardinals, and pope. And we have pastor, conference, union, division, and general conference. Same level, each one supervising the ones below, etc. So I'll just say, we got problems, and Ellen White's response to that in 1903, you can look at it in volume 8 of the Testimonies. She had let me just say this, she had previously said in volume 8, page 67, that if we don't walk in the light, we will be like Jerusalem. She said, the quote is, Jerusalem is a representation of what the church will be if it refuses to walk in the light God has given. Then, when they voted back the hierarchical power structure, voting themselves power, basically, in 8 Testimony 247, she says, we're not walking in the light. Our experience is far from what it should be. And on page 250, she said, how has the faithful city become a harlot? My Father's house is made a house of merchandise, a place whence the divine presence and glory have departed. Past tense, okay? And my point is that there are problems with the church today that we don't see fully. And this is true in Ezekiel 9. Ezekiel didn't see all the things, but there was judgment that fell, and those that sigh and cry and are looking for deliverance can get delivered, I believe, from it. This is maybe more than I intended to share at this time, and there's more that I could say, but the wedding parables are rich with meaning, and we can get there if we understand them. You might enjoy a book that I have for free on the internet. It's God Bless America, a question mark, because America is indeed like Egypt, and God is going to execute judgment on America and Adventism for our waywardness. If you want to read about it in Volume 9, in Volume 9, page 11, it's the last crisis, 9/11, and page 12, she's in New York City, sees tall buildings, warned to be fireproof. She sees them consumed as if made of pitch. Okay, Ellen White is a true prophet. She saw it 100 years early before it happened here. But then, page 92 and 3, she's at Loma Linda. Just like she was in New York, saw New York City and the problem, she's at Loma Linda and sees a vision of an earthquake in which many lives are blotted out, and it seemed that Judgment Day had come. Well, I believe Ellen White is very careful in her words, and Judgment Day includes us at this point. Judgment must begin at the house of God, and some people reading that think that she's talking about San Francisco because there was an earthquake at that time, actually a couple days later, and so they think, oh, she's just writing about San Francisco. But on page 95, this is volume 9, she said, through his prophet Zephaniah, the Lord specifies judgments he will bring, future. And she quotes verse 8, that in the day of the Lord's sacrifice, God says, I will punish the king's children. Well, that's us. This is not San Francisco. And my point is that there are things about Loma Linda that most people do not know about, and I'm not going to open a can of worms here now, but it's trouble. And I just say judgment will be coming. And before the church splits over women's ordination or some other issue, it will split into wise and foolish virgins. That's the prophetic way it will split if we're ready. And so I would encourage you to get a free copy of my book, God Bless America, on Saturday, Sabbath. If you go to Amazon.com and type in my name, Richard Ruling, spelled R-U-H-L-I-N-G. If you don't have a Kindle, download their free app first. They have an for your computer, PC, or phone, whatever. You can get an app, and then you can download that as a free copy into your app and read it. And if you can't, why, email me, and I'll send you the PDF for it if you want. I'm not trying to make money. I'm just concerned that the wedding for Christ is our wedding as well. And it risks, at this point, I wonder where 144,000 will be ready when it comes. The clues for the wedding parable suggest Passover time. That's when God took Israel to a covenant. They left Egypt at Passover. And the wedding parables, like the midnight cry, that goes back to Passover in Egypt. There was a cry at midnight then. And in Luke's wedding parable, it says, have your loins girded. That was Exodus 12, verse 11. Okay, and it says, blessed is that servant whom his Lord finds watching. Watching means be awake. They were awake. In Exodus 12, verse 10, they were to leave nothing till morning. They were to eat the Passover. And he says, he will gird himself and make us sit down to eat and serve us. Well, that's what he did at the Last Supper, at Passover. So we just gloss over and think we don't do that, and so on. We're missing Ellen White's statement in Desire of Ages, page 652, that says, as he, Christ, ate the Passover with his disciples, he instituted in its place the service that was to be the memorial of his great sacrifice. If we did it in its place, we'd be doing it at Passover. And there is an important modification that I should share with you. And when Mark Finley accuses David Gates of time setting, God set the time. David Gates didn't, but he is trying to recognize the time when he says spring, okay? Because at Passover in the spring is when Israel would pray that God would pass over them in judgment. They did that on the night of Egypt, okay? But there was an important modification. You know, when Christ is coming as bridegroom, he wants a mature bride. He doesn't want some dumb bride that doesn't know anything. He wants people who are intelligent in regard to, like he wanted Israel. Israel at Sinai worshipped a calf. They were stupid, okay? This must not happen to Christ, okay? And the understanding of some topics that explain who he is and what he wants from us include the statutes and judgments that Elijah is supposed to restore. Remember Malachi 4, verse 4 and 5? Remember the law of Moses with the statutes and judgments. Behold, I send you Elijah. Those, and by the way, Elijah is supposed to restore all things in Matthew 17, verse 11, before he comes. Those statutes and judgments have a sevenfold emphasis in Ezekiel 20, where they're also linked to Sabbaths. They enjoin the Sabbaths, the annual Sabbaths. In Leviticus 23, there were annual Sabbaths, 7 of them in the year, and Passover had 2 of them, the first and last day of unleavened bread. And but there was a modification in the law that I wanted to tell you about, because Christ's closing parables, all 7 of them, support this modification. And that is, as the days of Noah, the flood came with Passover timing, but in the second spring month. Why is that? Because Noah buried his grandfather, Methuselah. Methuselah's name meant, at his death, the sending forth of waters, which means he died as a sign the flood was impending. Ellen White says he died the year of the flood. Noah had to bury his grandfather, and so he was unclean, according to Numbers 9, verse 10 and 11. You can look this up. This is an important text. Numbers 9, verse 10 and 11. If you're unclean by reason of a dead body, or if you're on a journey afar off, you keep Passover the 14th day of the second month. That's 1 month later. And the last parables of Christ all fit that timing, 14th day of the second month. After 5 virgins missed the wedding, Christ says, watch, which means be awake. It's like Passover, but it's not like you think. He says, you don't understand or you don't know. It doesn't mean you can't know, won't know, never know. Christ was talking to disciples who were thinking first Passover. And Christ says then, it's not like you think, because or for the kingdom of heaven's like a man traveling to a far country. Hello, that's the provision for second Passover. If Israelites travel in spring, couldn't get back in time, they were to keep Passover the second month. And this may seem a little technical to you, but this is understanding of the law. By the way, the word law comes from Torah. It means 5 books of Moses. Okay, it's not just 10 commandments. The 10 commandments were like table of contents to the law. If you got the table of contents right, you know the rest of it, supposedly. And the early disciples in Acts 15, they didn't have to do all those things joining the church. Why? Because in verse 21 it says, Moses has in every city them that preach him in the synagogue from Sabbath to Sabbath. It's an excellent text to show non-Adventists that Sabbath to Sabbath, every Sabbath. Yeah, Sabbath's important, but learning in the synagogue from Sabbath to Sabbath things that Moses taught. And we're not doing that, okay? We have a prescribed lesson by the Sabbath School Quarterly, and if you try to share anything else, you can't talk about that, okay? So my point is, a lot we're not seeing maybe, but the end times are going to come for those best who understand God's laws and what He wants from us in terms of a prenuptial agreement. That's explained in the book also that you can pick up for free. This is not about money; it's about readiness. And obviously, we're not ready. Ellen White said how poorly we're prepared to meet Christ because the trials and attitudes and experience of the people of God before the first Advent represent our experience today, our trials and attitudes before the second Advent. She said that in one selected message, page 406. And on page 411, she says people who cannot take an honest consideration of a position that differs from theirs are not fit to teach in any department of God's cause. What I'm sharing with you is different, but if you don't investigate it, you're not fit to teach Sabbath school or in any department of God's cause. That's maybe sharp, but I have faced it in the sense that people think they know, but Laodicea thinks it knows, and Christ says, you don't know. You're wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked. We need an openness to talk about the issues. If we can't do that now, it will be too late later. Okay, a few months early is better than a day late for what's coming next spring, I believe, at second Passover. And the huge heads-up sign for what's coming will be the destruction of Jerusalem. I believe that's first month, or at least Jerusalem compassed with armies. Christ said, when you see that, you know its desolation is nigh. We think, oh, that happened in 70 A.D. But if you look at Zechariah 14, 1 and 2, it says all nations will be gathered against Jerusalem to battle, not just Rome. Okay, and it's for the day of the Lord. That's the end time period. Another look at it in Matthew 22, verse 6 says the remnant treated the invitation to the wedding poorly, and in verse 7 they had their city burned. Well, we're the remnant, and what's our city? I think it's Loma Linda, and hold on to your hat, because when judgment comes, it's going to be very serious. As probably the LA area will be impacted by the San Andreas Fault earthquake as well, which is where Loma Linda is sitting. So thank you for considering this. Please keep an open mind. As God's servants, we should be inviting people to a wedding. That's the whole point of the first Matthew 22, starting in verse 2. The king makes a marriage for his son and sends his servants to bid people to the wedding. And hello, how are we doing that? If we think we're inviting them to heaven for cake, that's not it. Won't get there. That's not how the wedding occurs. And we need to wake up, understand it, and share what we know. And if you don't understand it, get back to me. I'll be happy to. My email, if you need to email me, is ruling7, spelled RUHLING 7, at Juno, JUNO.org. I'm sorry, .com, Juno.com. Ruling7 at Juno.com. You've been great to listen. Please like this. If you like it, you may get the next one that comes or alert when I make another one. I don't make them every day or every week, but people ask me to respond to Mark Finley. And David Gates, in my opinion, I don't think it's going to be a Sunday law next spring. But Cestus brought the banner, but it got knocked down when the Jews came out. I think we're a few years away, 3.5 really. In Revelation 11, verse 3, God gives his side power for 1,260 days. And it says in verse 7, when they finish their testimony, the beast ascends to make war. And in Revelation 13:5, that beast has power 42 months. Not 42 months, days for a year of 1,260 years, but literal 3.5 years after we get the power for a similar time. God's going to give equal time, both sides, then it'll be over. And thank you for understanding this. Look forward to, it makes sense to me, at least, and to some people that I talk with when they have a chance to hear it all. And so like the video, and if you get any email from me, take a look at it. Thank you so much. God bless.